So thank you, everyone. So for the next topic for today on climate risk, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Sachal, who is currently a general insurance partner at Foremost Analytics Consulting based out of London. With 10 years of experience in the insurance industry across different countries, Sachal is also no stranger to us, given that he was formerly a fellow of the Singapore Actuarial Society when he was based in Singapore before moving to London in 2021. His experience includes reserving, reporting, and capital modeling, and he has also worked on various regulatory deliverables for companies in Malaysia, Singapore, and India. Currently, Sachal is an active member of IFOA's Climate and Nature Risk-Related Working Party, the group tasked to bringing the industry up to speed with this topic, which puts him in a great position to speak about this topic today. Sachal has also been involved in IFRS 17 since 2018 in various roles covering setting policies, performing financial analysis, delivering IFRS 17 models, training actuaries and finance departments, and leading a dry run for a FTSE 100 reinsurer. And with that, I'd like to welcome Sachal on board. Over to you.
Thank you, Chun Leong. I'll start by sharing my screen. And let me know when you can see it.
Yes, we can see it.
Perfect. So thanks for the introduction and thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure to come back, even though it's virtual, to Singapore. As Chun Leong mentioned, I was there for 5 years till early 2021. And I think I attended almost every possible Singapore Actuarial Society event. And here I am trying to give back to the society, give back some knowledge that I have on the topic, as I got a lot from you all who are based in Singapore. So fortunately, I joined the meeting just 10 minutes back, and I realized the previous meeting was about similar climate and nature related risk topic. So I guess all your brains are tuned for this one, and hopefully you have a few questions for me, which I'll take towards the end. A bit of disclaimer. I have about 30 to 35 minutes for the presentation, and I have just touched climate risk and not covered nature. And I guess you'll realize when I talk through my slides, there's a lot to know on climate. There's a lot known in climate risk to discuss about. And nature risk is something that we are still looking in detail. And I'm at IFO Working Party actually going into details of nature related risk now and understanding how we can assess it better. Again, thanks for having me here. I'll probably start by talking about why this topic. So as Chun Leong mentioned, I was involved in IFRS 17 for about 5 years. Like when I say involved, I don't think I looked into anything beyond IFRS 17 or not even spoken with professionally anyone beyond IFRS 17 or IFRS 9. So all my friends, all my office calls, everything used to be just IFRS 17. And as and when IFRS got live and things were under control, we had more time, I realized that climate and nature risk is something I always wanted to go back to. And I realize now I have time. So I'll go into it, try to understand it, and see where we can help as actuaries. So that was why I actually am bringing this topic here. I want you guys to also start looking into things that are more current, more real, and would have a bigger and longer impact to all of us and the future generations. So I'll introduce climate change, what it means, why it's happening, and again, I think most of us know about it. I won't cover a lot of time, or I won't spend a lot of time here. I'll talk about some key terms, what climate change risks are, like different types of risk, because I think if you start your journey, start looking into climate change, or if you are in conversations with somebody on climate change, I think you need to know a few terms. I'll briefly touch upon a research we did at Foremost on UK-based data, how temperature and mortality are linked. Very important one. When I started a few months back, I heard a lot about this regulator, that regulator, this change, that change. I'll just talk about how this all started, or who are the main bodies driving this disclosure journey. Then comes the main role of actuaries. I don't even think I have to talk a lot about role of actuaries. I will do that, but I guess looking at the impact, looking at how technical things can get, looking at how wide the impact is, you guys would understand already where you can pitch in and support. Uh, I think I'll spend half a minute on ACRI. It's something that actuaries are doing in the North America, and I guess something similar could be done for global or from global actuaries globally. Then we'll summarize and open it up for questions. So first of all, what is climate change? So climate change now, I think with media, and not only media talking about climate change, but with all the things that are happening across the world, rising sea levels, higher temperatures, longer summers or hotter summers, and in some places, hotter winters on an average, but abrupt temperature increases and decreases. I think all these regional and global changes in your climate is what we call in general climate change. And the main driver, again, if you look at different researches and different calculations, you'll see different numbers, but I think it won't move from one to the other that much. And I didn't want to add a lot of numbers here because I thought unless I've done or unless I'm sure about the research, I won't put the exact numbers. But what I found out was that 75% of impact is driven by carbon dioxide increase in the atmosphere, which is driven by mainly fossil fuels. And there's been a lot of methane increase, which is driven by agriculture, waste, and all that stuff. But I guess the main contributor of climate change so far known is carbon dioxide increase. Now, why do we need to consider climate change? Or actually, what are these gases like methane, carbon dioxide doing or helping or saving us or making us our lives worse? So basically, if you don't know about this much, and it might sound like a science lesson, but what happens is as Earth gets heated by sun, these gases basically trap the heat and keep our Earth warm. So, as per my reading, if there were no gases at all, I think the average temperature of Earth would be below -10, probably somewhere around -18. So it's like these gases are important, and because of these gases, a temperature is maintained, and naturally, the whole ecosystem works pretty nicely. But the problem is that because of our intervention with the nature, because of us doing all the industrial revolution without considering the impact on climate for many years, we have increased carbon dioxide by 50% in the atmosphere and methane by 150% over many years, which means that the heat is getting trapped more than before. The average temperature of the world, if it was 14 or now it is 15, for Singapore, the average temperature has increased to 28 degrees Celsius from 26.9, which sounds just like 1 degree. But if you think about it, that this is aggregating into a much bigger number in futures. It's not like a linear increase. It will exponentially increase because we are not reducing the things we are doing, we are increasing it every day. And that is the cause of concern. Like if you don't stop things now, it will only get worse and at a faster pace. Now, we all, and I also mentioned it before, that this impacts intensity, frequency of a lot of weather events, floods, droughts, heat waves, uh, and you see all over the news across the world. It's not impacting just one country. It's the world that is getting impacted, and all of us are indirectly or directly getting impacted there. A lot of diseases are occurring because of hotter summer or increased heat waves or the changes in weather. So our bodies, and I think even all the plants and other animals, We all have a temperature, a weather, an environment that we grow up in, and we are comfortable in that one. Any change creates a, a disease or sort of creates or triggers our body to fight and get used to a new thing. So smaller changes we won't realize. So probably a 0.12 degree average increase we won't realize, but 1.5 degree average increase or extreme hot summer, which is say UK getting up to 40 degrees Celsius, has a big impact on humans and other ecosystem as well. Now, other than that, I think we also know that rising sea levels is a threat, and it is a cause of, or it is caused by climate change. So heat is getting absorbed much at a much faster and more level than before. It is basically melting our icebergs at a faster pace than it should, and then eventually all the water goes into seas and it comes uh, and it brings us to a risk of increasing river levels, increasing sea levels, higher chances of different calamities, and of course, there's a huge risk to life and infrastructure because of it. And there's more to this, but I'll just stop here and move on to the key considerations of the key climate changes. So wherever you go and read about climate or nature risk, the majority of papers would have broken it down into physical, transition, and liability risk. So physical risk is more about direct impact. So damage to infrastructure, damage to admin systems is one of them. So the companies would have to pay for all these damages more than before because these will occur more. It could be high heat, uh, ruining your computer systems or your servers, or could be weather, higher rain levels, making it difficult for a lot of companies to operate. Increased temperature has adverse impact on life expectancy or on mortality rates, and I'll cover a little bit about it in the next slide. It also impacts your driving conditions. And I don't know if you have read news that because of hotter summers, roads sometimes melt as well. So you'll have potholes just because of higher heat. You have higher water levels in rivers. You'll have overflow on the road. So difficult driving conditions. Adv- Adverse effects are on agriculture as well. So droughts or extra rain doesn't help our farmers. So they need the weather to be consistent, to be able to do what they do, whereas grow plants at the right season with the right weather. And then last but not the least, people are getting more sick. And again, it's just change in weather. It's just the weather becoming worse, hotter, higher rains, and extreme events causing people to get sick, and morbidity rates are increasing. So this is the direct impact. Then to change or to reduce the climate change effect, we have these transition risks, which is basically government policies uh, getting implemented, and that cause a risk for a lot of companies that you would have to increase your cost to deliver all the changes, all the legal requirements that are getting introduced. And the problem is there's nothing set right now because everybody is trying to figure out. There will be introduction of policies now, but think about it that it's an exploration phase. People are trying to understand more about all the climate and nature risk, and it's a regular impact on companies to introduce new technologies, introduce new policies, or get used to new policies, be compliant. Otherwise, you'll be fined, uh, I guess, heavily eventually. So it's a regular shift in how you do business. It's a regular shift on what consumers think is better for the environment and what consumers think is worse for the environment. So whatever assets you're holding are getting repriced or will lead to repricing of them because of how they are perceived or how healthy or how climate friendly they are perceived. Then, of course, all this comes with expenses. So any reputational loss you get because of negative perception of public that you are not following a set rules or you're not controlling your emissions to a standard will come with a huge fine and a lot of impact on cost. So these are the two main physical and transition risk, but the third one is liability. And liability risk is just like third party liability today. So without covering the specific points, for example, if there is an industry that got set up and due to that industry, a lot of trees were cut and the people living around are suffering from worse weather. Now, with changes in regulations in some countries, people can claim or people can sue those companies. And if insurers are covering those companies for losses or climate risk related losses, insurers would have to pay for it. This is getting more and more common. It is good for public to get compensated. It's not good for insurance companies who would have to pay it without realizing or without budgeting or reserving for it. So I guess understanding what sort of liability risks are coming is part of doing this liability risk or transition risk management job. Now, what at foremost we did was we have an article in the Actuary magazine, and I'll share the slides with a link where you can get a lot of details. In Crux, we looked into the population in UK and impact to them of change in weather. Now, UK summer in 22, the worst it got was to 40 degrees Celsius, and on an average, it is now over 24 degrees Celsius. So people were used to a set level of 24, up till 24 for summer. And as the average weather increases by a degree or decreases by a degree from -3 below to -4, we notice that people who are over 65 years old, there is 1.5% increase for every mortality increase for every 1% increase of temperature. Now that's a big number. So think about it. Every time the summer is hotter by a degree, you see higher increase of mortality for people who are less healthy or who are older generation. I think again, a lot of research will say a bit different, but this is something we did actually. If you go into the paper, you realize how things could be done using publicly available data and how you can use it for, say, Singapore or other Asian countries as well. So it's mortality, how it gets impacted with temperature, and we did a model on simulations of different temperature paths and made sure that we have a scenario for each one to come up with our average expectation or projection of how mortality would behave with temperature. So it's a good read. Go through it, and I'm sure you'll get encouraged to do something similar. Now, knowing all about how climate changes affect us all, I think I wanted to understand what is TCFD. So Task Force of Climate Related or Task Force for Climate Related Financial Disclosures was set up in 2015 as part of Finance Stability Board by G20 finance ministers and central bank governors. So when I started reading about climate risk, TCFD was something that came everywhere. And I was not sure how actually it started. And so I went back to understand, and I think you guys will do same whenever you start your climate risk or nature risk, and you go back to basics and what was it and what did they say. So this was set up to make sure globally people have some consistency on what they report on climate risk. And I think it was very important. It actually is industry led. So a lot of industry people and important key people who are getting impacted on disclosure side, they came together. It is sitting in Finance Stability Board, and it is quite important and regularly updated. I would say task force. So TNFD is equivalent, talking about just nature. But if you read once and read the other, they are very similar, doing similar things. So I'm covering TCFD here, but if you go back, TNFD will be doing the same thing. So TCFD issued 11 recommendations across I would say across different four themes for companies, which meant they give you some sort of recommendation on governance that you have to provide, say, disclosures covering these two topics under governance, these three topics under strategy, these in risk management, these in metrics. And it's more about your disclosures should explain how your senior management is getting involved or how you have looked into all the risks that you are exposed to. Basically, they gave recommendations and not exact disclosures, but some 11 recommendations. If each country, each regulator follows those, they are sort of talking about the same thing. So at least cover that 11 and then look beyond them. So where do we stand today? So if you start today, you'll realize TCFD is something which is very critical for climate risk disclosures. And countries like UK and New Zealand have mandated companies to actually provide climate risk disclosures in line with TCFD. And you will read sometimes regulators are following partially TCFD or companies are presenting partially on TCFD, which means that out of the 11, say companies are doing just five right now. They are saying that, okay, we'll disclose these five things, one under governance, two under strategy, one under risk management and matrix and target each. So basically, when you go through those papers, you read through it, this is how you have to make sense of what these things mean. Now, many jurisdictions, including Singapore, they have started, and I'll cover a bit more in next slide, but they have started their climate risk journey as well. They have mandated partially, either partially like on submitting partial recommendations or partial disclosures based on partial recommendations, or they have mandated a few companies or a few lines of businesses to produce it. So, as per the latest status report, disclosures have increased dramatically, and there are numbers, but again, numbers change every month, and I didn't want to bring numbers to today because I was not very confident that which one to really follow, whether I took 22 number or 21 number, or do I consider only Asia or globally. So as of today, Europe is leading on these disclosures, and you'll see a lot of European countries actually working really a lot on climate risk disclosures. A lot of actuaries are already involved here, and it is followed by Asia Pacific. And when I say that, I mean that even if you look at in Singapore, as per my understanding, all the listed companies were already asked to present disclosures in 22, either on comply or explain basis. So either you disclose it or you explain it why you're not being able to do it. But there is a shift, and this was, I think, by Singapore Exchange to actually for listing, or one of the listing rules that you have to have their disclosures based on climate risk. Now, 2023 is when the three industries, basically finance, agriculture, food, and energy, and these three were mandated to publish full CRDs. So you will see a lot of these disclosures coming through. I have copied link to Singtel's disclosure. It's a good read. It's quite nice to see how actually these things can get presented. And this will help you understand like which part of disclosure can you get involved in, or do you prefer to get involved in. Because again, it's time to actually understand it better, and rather than waiting for people to come to you to say that, okay, you should work on A, B, or C. What I want is, after my presentation, you know what are the basics, you have a few resources, you go into it and understand it better, and also pick one area or two areas where you would want to get involved in. So go through these reports, and you'll find that it's quite useful. It has a lot of information, but you'll also see how you can improve what is in there. Then 2024 is when these disclosures will be mandated to material and building and transportation industry. So basically, say by 2025, all listed companies, even if you are incorporated overseas and listed in Singapore, would have to report CRDs. So it will be mandated. And the plan is that by 2027, all non-listed companies with Sing dollars a billion, a revenue of Sing dollars a billion or more than a billion, would be required to report CRDs. I know these dates change, but I think all the companies would have to start considering these are the final dates and try to build as much as possible right away. If I'm not wrong, the target is 2030 for all the other companies to come on board as well. But again, as I said, things change. The point today is to get started, and it is for you all and we all basically as actuaries to get involved as much as possible. Now, the key topic. I don't think I have to go into details of each, but I'll still do it because that's where I said I'll be talking about actuaries get involved. So it's way beyond these four things, but I'll cover risk assessment, scenario and stress testing, investment strategy, and I think there was some talks about investment strategy just before me, and then regulatory and disclosure requirements. So as actuaries, I think risk assessment is quite close to us. And what climate change is adding is another complicated risk. Now, a lot of people are working on it. A lot of people are trying to identify the main risk and putting together, okay, what we need to do to assess their financial impact. But I think when actuaries get involved, they fit quite well doing these things, like managing the risk or identifying the risk, quantifying it, and also looking into the future, like, okay, what will be the impact in future of these changes? It's not just about today. It's not about looking in your companies and saying, okay, these are the risks that we get impacted on. This is how much carbon emissions we are exposed to. It's also about if we take this decision, if we do right this sort of business, what more are we exposed to? So it's also about making sure you adjust the pricing, looking into what are the transition risks. Are we covering any climate change, transition or third-party risk in our policies? It's also about changing your underwriting strategy, so you're not underwriting and getting exposed to a lot of companies that are highly involved in contributing to climate change risk or directly getting impacted to climate change and have huge physical risk involved there. So if you are underwriting, you need to make sure you consider all the climate changes that are coming in the future or that will be exponentially increasing in the future. Then, of course, we as actuaries get involved in internal measures. We get involved in how our company will reach a specific goal. And this goal is to be climate neutral or try to be climate neutral as much as possible. And if we are not involved, I don't know who else will be supporting our companies. Like, I think we have to be involved because it is a goal that has to be achieved in future. It is something that is risky. It has a financial impact, and that's all I think almost all the actuaries get involved into. Of course, I mentioned there's a huge expense because of physical risk, but huge expense because of transition and liability risk as well. And I think wherever uh, there is some sort of analysis needed, I think we should get involved. Then scenario and stress testing. Not every regulator right now is adding climate change in their regulations, but I think at one point or the other, you would have to calculate SCR or solvency capital ratio under climate change modules as well. You would have to do a lot of modeling. You have to analyze what is the impact on mortality and morbidity. So something very similar to what we did at Foremost using publicly available data and doing some projections. I think you would have to do it for your company specific data or industry specific data as well. You would have to see the trends, understand it, and help others understand the impact of which climate change, impact that climate change brings to mortality and morbidity. Identifying of the risk that we are not even thinking about right now, or we don't know how extreme it could get. So the more people get involved, the more research that happens, the more that you guys look into it together, the better we all would get on understanding and identifying the risks and quantifying it. So I don't know why my slides are moving, but yeah. So I think risk identification and quantification goes back to basics, but it is the key here because things are moving every day. A lot of people are involved, but still there is a huge scope for actuaries to get more involved. Investment strategy. I think you would have come across a lot of investment strategies that are uh, ESG relevant and are looking into sustainability and investing in sustainability things or assets. So I think that's one part of it, making sure your asset liability management is taking care of all this, but also how resilient your investments are to climate change. So maybe there is some investment that you think is insustainable or is passing all the ESG rules. I guess there's still potential to look through them and see, okay, if climate changes, if there is a sea level rise, are these investments still resilient and they won't get affected by climate change? I think you would also need to make sure your projections and your discounting is considering the shift in your investment strategy. And of course, it is both short term, something that you would have to do in the next couple of years just because of regulations, and long term for actually making sure that your companies are covered for many, many years to come. Last but not the least, I think I did mention the local context. Singapore companies would require to disclose climate related disclosures, and it is actually globally for all the companies or countries. This will happen sooner or later. Now, I think for actuaries, this is one area which is not limited to insurance. It's not just about insurance companies doing this. All the work I mentioned, it's for all the companies, and that is a huge chance. That is a huge opportunity. So if you are in insurance and if you want to move out and be in industry, say building or say agriculture, I think you can also start by this. Start helping them by just making sure you understand all the risk and just put together all this analysis, identification, do some stresses on the business. So all this brings a lot of opportunity for all of us. There are regulatory requirements that are common. There will be financial statements that would have an impact due to climate risk, and you would have to see that, you would have to assess that and also present, explain people why you are saying that one risk will impact your profits. And there is more to come. There will be formal regulations. You would have to do a lot of it, but then a lot of companies would take an extra step and do more, which will be much appreciated globally by public, by all of us combined. Uh, similar to what Foremost did. So Foremost did some sort of internal research and for an article they published. Now ACRI is a bit bigger. They are actuaries from North America and Canada, and mainly uh, they come together or they came together to put some sort of index. And this index basically is a combination of impact of change in climate risk to different drivers. So they have physical impact on sea levels, they have impact on mortality, morbidity, and they have created an index for people to go in and use it. I don't know how much it is getting used right now, but if you go through their website, it's very useful, and I think we might need something very similar in other regions as well for actuaries to actually start looking and start aggregating all the different risks that are related to climate. Then, on my last slide and last few minutes, as I mentioned, it's a pressing issue. I think climate change is something that has been with us for a while. Uh, I I was reading that for past 40 years, each decade has been hotter than the last one, which means it will get hotter in future if we don't anything. I don't do anything. So it has significantly increased. The pace of change has increased. The impact of change has increased, and you would go into what sort of physical transition liability risk you as yourself, your companies, and the future generations would get impacted because of this change. I did mention about mortality, morbidity rates, and what we looked into. I think that's quite important. Regulatory requirements are always important. Like all of us, a lot of us were busy on IFRS and implementing one regulation or the other. This will be an additional thing coming in future, if not already in your countries. And I think we should all get ready to do it as proper as we can because it has a bigger impact than just producing some reports. Lastly, actuary's role, I think now you would know if you didn't know before. The climate risks are complex, have a global impact, have a future impact, have a present impact, and I think we are well equipped to deal with all of this. When I say deal, it's measure, identify, project, do stress and scenario testing. So all that I mentioned, the quantitative and qualitative assessment, we are quite well placed to do it, as well as managing our stakeholders and explaining senior management like why we expect numbers to move in future because of climate risk. I think that is something what we are used to doing. So as the risk evolves, we are evolving and we should be evolving as actuaries as well. I've added a lot of references. Before sharing the slides, I'll look into it if there's more information needed. But I think all I wanted to do today was trigger an urge for you all to go back, read the slides, go into details, and start contributing in any way you can. I know we all have other jobs, but I think this is something pressing. This is something we can contribute to. Just find your niche. Just try to find what you can do the best for your company or for your country or overall for the world, and how with our skill sets we can together help reducing, measuring, and reducing the climate change impact. With this, I'll again thank you all for your time, and I'll pause. I think we have a couple of minutes for questions. And in case we can't take your questions today, please feel free to reach any one of us. These are the people who helped me put slides. They have done a lot of work on climate risk, so it will be quite easy for them to answer than me, but I'll try my best.
Right. Thank you, Sachal, for the insightful presentation. Maybe to start off, right, I have one question to ask. Building on the point when you mentioned about climate risk scenarios. So on top of climate risk scenarios, do you think that there's any potential for capital regulations such as RBC2 in Singapore or Solvency II in Europe to actually include a climate risk charge? That means a risk charge
Yeah,
on its own.
yeah. Thanks, Chin Leong. I think it's a good question. Yes, the short answer is yes, and I think just to add, a lot of regulations are now wanting companies to produce climate change scenarios as the or add them in their solvency capital calculations as well. So they have either already implemented a few, or countries or regulators are looking into adding those scenarios in SCR calculations. I think I covered it briefly, but it is a yes, and that's why I'm saying get ready. There's a lot to do, including adding these scenarios and understanding these scenarios and presenting this either in ORSA or in your solvency capital calculation. So you would have a direct impact of all this. Did I
Right.
answer, Julian?
Yep, you did. Then another question on one of your points on investment. So do you think that currently right now the green bonds or environmentally friendly assets could cause the company's returns to be impacted? If the returns are lower compared to other asset classes, then what should be the strategy of the company in this case?
I think I'll answer in a I don't know, not so nice manner, but I feel like it's more like you will save a lot on penalties and taxes if you don't do it. So maybe if your current return of your investment side is 3 to 4% or 5 to 6%, maybe investing in these initially you would get a return of a bit lower, but then seeing how things are moving, you will be saving a lot of penalties because this will be mandated. It's not like you will be free to invest anywhere in any asset. You would have to consider green assets or you have to consider ESG policies and make sure all of this is within that circle of limited assets. The thing is, what I'm emphasizing it's something that you would have to do it, which means you have to figure out now, right, a way to get similar returns by managing your assets in those asset classes rather than waiting and then immediately investing at a more expensive rate and leading to a few penalties which would actually you would end up in a worse situation if you don't do it than in a better situation. So yes, it might be expensive at the outset, but it will save you a lot of fines and penalties, and in the longer run, you will have a higher capital acceptance because of your investments as well. So you will be saving a lot of capital there as well. So what I would say is the answer is yes in short term and no in medium to long term.
Right. Thank you, Sachal. We have something in the Q&A. It starts with a point followed by a question. So I'm going to read it out. Data for emissions calculations are murky and depends heavily on assumptions and methodology. So what can insurers do to account for such data issues and uncertainty?
Okay, I would say it's a very fair point, and that is the reason of presentation today. When I started looking into it, I realized exactly same. Data is like the question is even one level beyond what I figured is a problem. A lot of information is available, a lot of information is controversial, and for somebody to start, it's just too much. And I wanted to make sure today's presentation is simple and it covers the key points, but I didn't want to go into details of things that are not helping people to get started in it. That's a very high level answer, but there are a few companies, and you can reach out to me after. I'm not here advertising one or the other, that are reputed in the market, and especially in the countries where in Europe, where people or companies have already started reporting and doing the carbon emission calculations. There are a few reputed companies that have reasonable data where we can start. Of course, we are meant to do this job of making sure that if the data is not complete or correct, we make those adjustments. We do, based on our assumptions, change it as in how we expect it to be. It will be tricky, but this is what we have to start with. I agree with the problem. I think there is a partial solution, but then the second thing is our judgment call. And that's why I want us all to get involved and try to make that data as better as possible by challenging it.
All right. Thank you, Sachal, and thank you to the participant who asked that question. I guess we are looking at the schedule. It's time for a short break. So once again, thank you, Sachal, for making the effort despite being so early on your side in London. And I thank the audience for listening as well. And we'll see you back here at 3:30 p.m. sharp.
Thank you, Chung Leong. Thanks all, and thanks for the question. Again, if you have anything after you receive the slide, just feel free to reach out directly to me or anyone here. We'll be happy to help and answer any questions you may have. Thanks again. Enjoy your break.
Thank you, Sachal.